In that part of the western division of this kingdom, which is commonly called Somersetshire, there lately lived, and perhaps lives still, a gentleman whose name was Allworthy, and who might well be called the favourite of both nature and fortune, for both of these seem to have contended which should bless and enrich this most. From the former he derived an agreeable person, a sound constitution, and a sane understanding, and a benevolent heart. By the latter he was decreed to the inheritance of one of the largest estates in the country. This gentleman had in his youth married a very worthy and beautiful woman, of whom he had been extremely fond. By her he had 3 children, all of whom died in their infancy. He had likewise had the misfortune of burying this beloved wife herself about 5 years before the time in which this history chooses to set out. This loss, however great, he bore like a man of sense and constancy, for he sometimes said he looked on himself as still married, and considered his wife as only gone a little before him, a journey which he should most certainly sooner or later take after her. He now lived for the most part retired in the country with one sister, for whom he had a very tender affection. This lady was now somewhat past the age of 30, an era at which, in the opinion of the malicious, the title of the old maid may with no impropriety be assumed. She was of that species of women whom you commend rather for good qualities than beauty, and she was so far from regretting want of beauty that she never mentioned that perfection, if it can be called one, without contempt. Miss Bridget Allworthy, for that was the name of this lady, very rightly conceived the charms of a person in a woman to be no better than snares for herself as well as for others, and yet so discreet was she in her conduct that her prudence was as much in the guard as if she had all the snares to apprehend which were ever laid for her whole sex. Indeed, I have observed, though it may seem unaccountable to the reader, but this God of prudence is always readiest to go on duty where there is the least danger. It often basely and cowardly deserts those paragons for whom the men were all wishing, sighing, dying, and spreading every net in their power, and constantly attains at the heels of that higher order of women for whom the other sex have a distant and awful respect, and whom from despair, I suppose, of success, they never venture to attack. Mr. Allworthy had been absent a full quarter of a year in London on some very particular business. He came to this house very late in the evening, and after a short supper with his sister, retired much fatigued to his chamber. Hereafter spending some minutes on his knees, a custom which he never broke through on any account, he was preparing to step into bed when, opening the clothes, to his great surprise, he beheld an infant wrapped up in some coarse linen, in a sweet and profound sleep between his sheets. He stood some time lost in astonishment at this sight, but as good nature had always the ascendant in his mind, he soon began to be touched with sentiments of compassion for the little wretch before him. He then rang his bell and ordered an elderly woman servant to rise immediately and come to him. She no sooner opened the door and saw her master standing